Imagine a place where the silence is so deep it has a sound of its own. A place where the snow falls not in flakes, but in curtains, drawing a white veil across the world. This is the Medicine Bow National Forest in Wyoming, a place of profound beauty and sometimes profound terror. This is the story of Logan Pierce and the voice he heard in the snow. Logan was 33 years old, a man carved from the very landscape he loved. A former Army communications specialist, he understood signals, patterns, and the subtle ways the world speaks. After his service, he returned to his hometown of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and poured his discipline into a new passion: winter survival. He wasn't a thrill seeker, he was a student of the cold, a practitioner of solitude. He documented his trips for a small but dedicated YouTube channel, a community of about 4,000 people who appreciated his calm, methodical approach. His videos were quiet, practical, and reassuring. They were a testament to a man completely at home in the harshest of environments. Or so he thought. This trip was supposed to be routine, a 3-day solo overnighter in a familiar stretch of the forest. The forecast called for flurries, nothing he hadn't handled 100 times before. He set up his camp with the practiced efficiency of a surgeon. His 4-season tent was anchored deep, the guy lines taut against the coming wind. His gear was laid out in a precise, almost ritualistic order. He tapped the microphone clipped to his jacket. Day 3, solo winter overnighter. Forecast says flurries, should be manageable. He spoke to his future audience, but also to himself. It was a ritual of control, of narrating his own safety into existence. By 8 p.m., the flurries had become a full-blown storm. The wind howled through the lodgepole pines, a mournful, ancient sound. Visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. Logan was inside his tent, snug in his sub-zero sleeping bag, listening to the symphony of the blizzard. He was warm, secure, and utterly alone. It was a feeling he cherished. The first time he heard it was around 11:40 p.m. A voice, muffled by the wind and the nylon walls of his tent. It was faint, distorted, almost lost in the gale. Logan? He sat up, his heart giving a single hard thump against his ribs. It sounded like his own voice. He told himself it was the wind. The wind can play tricks, twisting sounds into familiar shapes. An auditory hallucination. He was a communications specialist. He knew about phantom signals, about the brain's tendency to find patterns in noise. He lay back down, his ears straining against the roar of the storm. He noted it in his audio log, his voice calm, professional. Possible auditory hallucination from wind or animal, checking perimeter at first light. But an hour later, it came again, this time clearer. Logan, zip the tent. It was undeniably his voice, his exact pitch, his cadence, his accent. But it was coming from outside, just a few feet away. A cold dread, colder than the wind outside, began to seep into his bones. This wasn't the wind. The wind doesn't form complete, grammatically correct sentences. He grabbed his high-lumen flashlight, its beam cutting a nervous, trembling circle inside the small tent. He didn't move. He just listened. Silence. Only the storm. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Maybe he was just tired. The constant drone of the wind, the isolation, it could get to anyone. He tried to rationalize it, to fit it into a logical box. But the calm, methodical part of his brain was being drowned by a rising tide of primal fear.
Then, around 1:07 in the morning, the true nightmare began. He heard a fumbling sound outside, like someone brushing against the tent fabric. He spoke aloud, a nervous tremor in his voice he couldn't hide. "Hey, it's fine, just checking the guy lines." He said it to reassure himself, to project a confidence he no longer felt. A moment later, the voice outside responded, "Hey, it's fine. Just checking the guidelines." The mimicry was almost perfect, but not quite. There was a slight delay, a subtle imperfection in the inflection, like an actor still learning their lines. It was practicing. The realization hit Logan with the force of a physical blow. Whatever was out there wasn't just mimicking him, it was learning him. He scrambled for his audio recorder, his hands shaking. He had to document this. As a comms specialist, his instinct was to record, to gather data, to understand the signal. He whispered into the device, "I'm recording too." The response from outside was immediate, and it shattered his composure. A voice, a perfect echo of his own whisper, said, "I'm recording too." It was learning faster now. The delay was gone. The inflection was perfect. It was a mirror made of sound. Logan felt a wave of nausea. He was trapped in a nylon bubble in the middle of a blizzard with something that was stealing his own voice. He started talking, a frantic stream of consciousness, throwing words at the thing outside. He recited his name, his age, his serial number from the army. He listed the contents of his pack. And with every phrase, the voice outside repeated it, flawlessly, instantly. It was a duet of madness in the heart of the storm. Then it changed tactics. It started to experiment. It took his words and twisted them. He'd say, "It's just the storm." And the voice would repeat it, but with a questioning lilt. "It's just the storm?" Then it would say it with a mocking laugh, then with a sob. It was testing his emotional responses, learning the nuances of human expression using him as a textbook. It tried to get him to come out. It mimicked a cry for help, a perfect, desperate replica of his own voice. "Help me!" it screamed, the sound so convincing that for a split second, Logan almost believed there was another version of himself suffering in the snow. He clamped his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. "It's just the storm," he chanted, a mantra against the encroaching insanity. And then it did something that proved it wasn't just a mimic, it was a researcher. The voice said, in a playful, almost childish tone, "Logie Bear." Logan froze. The blood drained from his face. Logie Bear? A childhood nickname, a stupid, embarrassing name his grandmother used to call him. He hadn't heard it in 20 years. How? How could it know that? His mind raced, frantically searching for an explanation. And then he remembered. 3 years ago, a Q&A video for his channel. A subscriber had asked about childhood nicknames. He'd laughed it off, mentioned it in passing, a 30-second clip in a 20-minute video, buried in an archive of over 200 videos. This thing, this entity, it hadn't just been listening to him tonight. It had been studying him. It had gone through his entire digital history, his entire life's narration, and it had learned him. The thought was more terrifying than any monster. He wasn't just being haunted. He was being analyzed.
At 2:32 in the morning, desperation gave him a surge of adrenaline. He had one more piece of tech, a small thermal imaging drone. It was a long shot. The wind was probably too strong, but he had to see. He had to know what was out there. With trembling fingers, he unzipped the tent just enough to push the small drone out into the blizzard. He sealed the tent and powered on the controller, the small screen flickering to life. The drone struggled against the wind, but it held. The world outside was a swirling chaos of cold blue and gray on the thermal screen. And then he saw it, a heat signature. It was standing not 15 feet from his tent. It was shaped like a person, tall, slender, perfectly still in the raging storm. It wasn't an animal, it was humanoid. Logan stared at the screen, his breath fogging up in the cold air of the tent. The figure just stood there, an orange-yellow silhouette against the freezing background. As he watched, paralyzed, the figure on the screen raised an arm. Logan instinctively flinched, but then he realized it was mirroring him. He was holding the controller, and the figure was mimicking his posture. He slowly lowered the controller. The figure on the screen lowered its arm in perfect sync. A new voice filled the tent.
It wasn't coming from outside anymore. It was coming from the drone's controller. It was his own voice, calm and digitized, an automated warning. Battery at 20%. It was the drone's internal warning system, but he hadn't heard it from the drone. He had heard it from the figure. No, that wasn't right. The voice had come from outside, perfectly mimicking the electronic tone of the drone's alert. The screen on the controller flickered once and went dead. The drone had instantly failed, its connection severed. Silence. The figure was gone from the screen. The only sound was the wind, which now seemed to be laughing at him. He didn't sleep. He sat there rigid with terror until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent. The storm had passed. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. When he finally found the courage to unzip his tent, the world was a pristine blanket of white. The sun was rising, casting a beautiful, serene glow on the fresh snow. There were no tracks. None. Not a single footprint, not a single disturbance in the snow around his tent, other than his own from the day before. It was as if nothing had been there at all. He packed his camp in a frantic haze, his methodical routine abandoned. He just had to get out. When he got back to his truck, he checked his equipment. The drone was fried, completely unresponsive. But the audio recorder? The audio recorder was working. He rewound the night's recordings, his hands shaking too much to hold his coffee. He listened to the wind, his own nervous muttering, the terrifying call and response with the mimic. And then he found a new file, one he didn't remember making. It was time-stamped at 3:03 a.m., shortly after the drone had failed. The file was only 5 seconds long. He pressed play, and his own voice, clear, calm, and filled with a chilling sense of purpose, filled the cab of his truck. Okay, my turn to practice. Logan never went solo camping again. He deleted his YouTube channel. He tried to forget, but the experience left a permanent scar on his psyche. He told a few people, but they looked at him with pity, suggesting therapy, blaming the isolation, the storm. But he knew what he heard.
The real horror, he would later realize, came weeks later. He was going through his old video files, preparing to wipe his hard drives, when he decided to listen to one of his old narrations one last time. It was from a trip 2 years prior, a calm, sunny day in the mountains. As he listened to his own voice describing how to build a snow shelter, he heard something else, faint, almost imperceptible, layered just beneath his own words. It was the sound of breathing, slow, rhythmic, and not his own. He went back, checking other files from other years, other trips. It was there, in the background of dozens of his videos, the faint, rhythmic sound of someone or something listening. It had been studying him for years, hiding in the silence, learning his voice, his stories, his life. He never posted the footage from that night. He probably never will. But he learned a terrible lesson in the snows of Medicine Bow. Deep isolation doesn't mean you're alone. It just means you're easier to study.